For this project, I'm using 2 of these reindeer. These are just from my collection of reindeer throughout the years, and I decided it's time to make them look a little bit more rustic. I'm giving them a quick spray of Rust-Oleum Clear Matte Finish. That's just going to help the paint adhere to the plastic. Once the spray paint has dried, I actually liked the look of this silver one. It wasn't shiny silver anymore. It looked more like pewter. So I'm going to remember that for the other shiny ones that I have. But I'm going to continue on with what I wanted to do with these. I'm giving them 1 coat of black chalk paint, and then I'm going to set them aside to dry completely. Once these were dry, I really liked the matte black look of them too. So I might be doing some solid black in the near future as well. But moving on, I'm just taking the Dollar Tree stenciling brush and some brown paint. This is called espresso, but you could use any type of brown paint that you have. You want it to be on the darker side though. This has a little bit of red in it, which is perfect for that rusty look that I'm going for. I'm just going to be pouncing with the brush all over it, covering it everywhere. It's gonna have a little bit of the black peeking through, but that was the whole point. I want these to look like rusty, crusty reindeer. I'm going to just create a little garland collar for each of the reindeer. This is a piece of the Dollar Tree garland that I trimmed really short because I don't like that really long fluffy look. And now I'm just adding some pip berries into this just to give it a little bit more of a festive look. Once I've got these on, I'm going to be adding tiny little bits of cedar branches that I've sort of frosted with some white spray paint, and they look a little bit snowy. If you've worked with the Dollar Tree garlands, you know that they are wired, so it was really easy for me to put them into a rounded sort of a horseshoe shape and then tuck them onto the neck of the reindeer. I really love how these turned out. I think they look absolutely rusted and so farmhouse, so much better than the clear and the silver that they were previously. This was such an easy project, but it has such a big wow factor. I really love how they turned out. I've been wanting to make some little mini houses for like a little Christmas village. So I took one of these signs that you can get at the Dollar Tree and I cut it down using my miter saw into different sizes, and then I angled the peaks at the top for the roof. Then I took a piece of 2 by 4 and I sliced it really thin. You can see that's what I'm putting on here for the roof. I cut them down to the right size and I'm just using hot glue to put it all together. The longwood signs with the writing on them aren't real wood. I believe they're some type of MDF product, so they're not super hard to cut. You don't need to use power tools. I just do it because I have little strength in my hands anymore, so I use the power tools to make my job a little bit easier. But you can definitely just use a miter box and a hacksaw to cut these. I'm giving all of the houses 1 coat of black chalk paint, but the reason I'm doing the black first is to cover up the letters that are on the other side of the sign pieces. You can see one in the left top corner. It's a very bright white, and this black will just help to camouflage that when I put my next colors on top. I gave each of the houses a couple of coats of color. One is green, one is red, and one is white. Now I'm going to be cutting out this printable that I created, and I will have this available on my website. The link to my website is down in my description box too. I'm going to cut this out and then use a glue stick to glue it on top of each of the houses. I'm going to use my craft knife to trim off the peak at the top where the roof line is. And then I'm going to grab some sandpaper and just sand off the excess all the way around. I'm going to repeat this for the other 2 houses. If you like what you see, I would love it if you could hit that red button and support the growth of my channel. My favorite product to use for snow or fake snow is Epsom salt. You can pick this up in bags like this at the dollar store. I think I paid $1.75 for this bag. And I really like it because number one, it's not like glitter, so you can clean it up really easily, but it still has a pretty little sparkle to it. It's a little chunky, so it almost looks like ice too. So that's another reason why I love it. What I'm going to do is take a brush and add Mod Podge to the roof of the houses. You can put the Mod Podge wherever you want. If you'd like to cover the whole roof, by all means, you can do that. Or you can just go around the edges like I'm doing for this first house. Once you've got a good amount of Mod Podge on there, do not be skimpy with it because otherwise the Epsom salt will not stick. I'm just going to take the house then and dip it right into the Epsom salt, kind of swish it around a little bit, kind of give it a little bit of a tap here and there, make sure that all of the Mod Podge is covered. And then I'll just set it aside to dry. It looks like beautiful ice crystals are sitting on top of each of these houses, and I really love this effect. This little village was really easy to make, and I think I'll probably making some more in the future. I hope you like them. This is an apron that I picked up at my local dollar store. It was a barbecue apron, but I love the red and white pattern on it, so I'm going to cut out a piece of fabric that I'm going to use to make a mini pillow. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a hem on all of the sides, except for where I'm going to be folding it. This is just going to make it so much cleaner when I glue all of the edges together. This is really easy to make it straight because of the squares that are there. I just put a bead of hot glue, not too much, you just need a little bit to tack it down, and then fold it over following the lines. I'm going to fold the piece of fabric so the right sides are facing each other and then start gluing the edges down. I'm just going to do the two side pieces for now because I need to do something else to this before I stuff it. Once the glue is set, you can carefully turn it inside out, and I'm taking my time doing this and making sure I don't push too hard into the corners. I just want to do it very gently to get those corners out. I cut out this design using my Cricut Explorer, but if you don't have one, you could definitely just do a stencil on this little guy. You could even print this design off on tissue paper and use just sparingly amount of Mod Podge or some spray adhesive to glue it on. Since this is just going to be a little decor piece, it really doesn't have to be soft by any means. I'm using a little mini heat press. This one is from Hippo. I'll have that linked down in my description box. For this second little project, I'm using a section of drop cloth. When you're cutting with fabric, make sure you use fabric scissors. It makes your life so much easier. You could also pick up a rotary cutter. I know that Dollar Tree sells those as well. Not sure how sharp the blade is, but it might work for a few times. I'm doing the same idea as I did with the red checkered one. The only exception to this is I'm not making any hems on this one. I will just be turning it inside out. Again, make sure that the glue is set up and completely dry before you attempt to flip it right side out, and very carefully push out those corners. I want this to have more of a flat bottom, so I'm going to go right to the corners, move in about a good inch or so, and just pull the sides apart, and that leaves you with this little triangle shape. I'm using some hot glue just to tack down these little triangle corners. I'm going to use the tip, just fold it over and hold it in place. And when I turn this right side out, I'll have created a little flat bottom for my bag. Again, be careful when you're turning it right side out. You don't want to pull off any of the glue. I'm just going to very gently kind of give it a shake here and then very slowly push out those corners. And you can see here that just making those little triangle shapes on the inside has created somewhat of a flat bottom for my bag. For the little bag, I used some red heat transfer vinyl, again, making sure that I reverse the image if it has any text on it. This did, so I had to make sure that I put the mirror on before I did the cut. And I love weeding heat transfer vinyl. It doesn't matter how intricate the pattern is, it always comes out great. It's because this vinyl is so much thicker than the regular vinyl that you use, and you really don't have to be too careful. I can really give this a good yank, and it doesn't pull off any of the other part of the design. I have these heat-resistant Teflon sheets that I use for a lot of my designs, especially when I'm doing sublimation. You can definitely just put a piece of parchment paper in between here. You just want to make sure that the glue that's going to be attaching your decal to the fabric doesn't stick to the back of your project. This design will also be available as a free printable on my website. I'll have one in red and one in black. I'm using my mini heat press again, and I believe the temperature was 350 degrees Fahrenheit and for 30 seconds. I'm using polyfill that came from a sleeping pillow that I got at Walmart. I think it was $4. So one of the really cheap ones, then it doesn't matter. You don't feel bad pulling it apart. I've had this for quite a while. I don't do a whole lot of pillows, but it does come in handy for different projects. I'm just being very gentle, again, stuffing the polyfill down into the corners. And once I get it stuffed with as much as I want, I'm simply going to use hot glue to glue the top together. I added some polyfill to the bag, and then I used some of the red and white twine that you can get from the Dollar Tree. I tied it really nice and snug at the top in a knot, and then I wrapped it around a couple more times and then just tied it one more time. I'm going to leave the little red and white pillow by itself. I think it doesn't need anything else to embellish it, but I'm going to add this bow to the bag, a few little cedar pieces, and a pine cone. And I think both of these pieces turned out absolutely adorable, and they'll look so pretty sitting on a tiered tray.
The first DIY I have for you today is using this little cutting board sign that came from Dollarama for $1.25. I don't need the hook or the sawtooth hanger, so I'm going to remove both of them. This sign is cute the way it is, but I'm going to give it a couple of coats of white chalk paint, and this is my own concoction. If you're looking for a good recipe for chalk paint, it's down in my description box. So I'm going to do the front, the back, the sides, everything of this little board a couple of times. I totally forgot while I started painting that I needed something to hold my little sign standing up. I'm just using this tumbling tower block that came from a different type of game at the thrift store. I'm just going to use some hot glue and glue my sign right down on it, and it'll stand up perfectly. If you've been following me on my channel, you know that I love printing on tissue paper. It gives you such a variety of projects to do, and I just absolutely love it. I just printed out this little gingerbread man from Pixabay, which will also be listed down in my description box, and the free printable itself will be on my website. I created the gingerbread bake shop words using my Cricut so I could get a nice rounded shape at the top. I'm just simply going to use Mod Podge to apply it to the little sign. To embellish my little gingerbread man, I'm going to add this red pipberry garland that came from the Dollar Tree. I saw it last year around Christmas time and grabbed a whole bunch of it because I just love the combination of that sort of dark red color and the brown. It's perfect for a rustic Christmas. I'll hot glue that around the gingerbread man in sort of an oval. I'm going to go in one direction first, then I'm going to trim it off and go in the opposite direction, making sure that my pip berries are staggered and not all in the same spot. Using a small chip brush and some black paint, I'm just going to be pulling in some of the black paint around the edges. It gives it a nice little feathered look and it also frames out the project. Then I'm going to use a very light touch and just drag my brush up and down so the gingerbread bake shop part gets a little bit of distressing as well. When I'm doing signs on tiered trays, I like to have them double-sided. That's why I painted this little sign front and back. Now I'm adding a cute little gingerbread house that I also found on Pixabay, and I'm just going to drop it right in the center towards the bottom using my Mod Podge technique, just like I did for the gingerbread man. I'm going to do the same type of distressing on the back, a little bit of a lighter touch, but I'm going to do it a little heavier right through the sign on top of the gingerbread house. A few holly leaves and a couple of red pip berries, and this side of the sign is complete as well. I think this one turned out super cute. Project number 2 is using one of these Dollar Tree wooden houses that was already used for a project last year. I'm going to repurpose it for this year, just painting the back of it with a couple coats of chalk paint. This is what the front looks like, but I'm going to now paint the interior with this sort of mossy green color. I really love this color. It's something that I use for spring a lot and for summer, but I think for Christmas, it just gives you a little bit of a different green rather than always just using those dark Christmas greens. When I was at the thrift store a couple of weeks ago, I bought this little bag of corks. These are brand new corks. I got them for $2 and I'm just going to cut one of them down a little bit. That's going to be the base or the stand of my little tree that I'm going to glue in here. I'm just going to use hot glue to put them in place. I'm going to start adding the corks by gluing the first one right on top of the tree stem. And then the rest of them I'm going to glue side by side. And because they are smaller at the top than at the bottom, it's going to give it a nice little angle. And I think this tree turned out super cute. Using a small, tiny, rough brush, I think it's a fan brush that I had cut down. I'm just using some white chalk paint and I'm just going to distress the green a little bit to make it look a little bit old. I'm going to use some of these little greenery sprigs and I'm going to just cut off or pull off tiny little bits, and those are what I'm going to be adding onto the corks just to give it more of a festive look. I'm just going to use hot glue and just poke them into the cracks, and then I'm going to also add some little red pip berries. To cover up the spots where I oopsed with my green paint, I'm just going to use some of this black and white twine that I picked up at Michael's last year, and I still have a half a roll left. So it's an amazing buy if you can use your coupon with it. And I'm just using a pair of tweezers that a sweet little subscriber and viewer sent me. Look at those tweezers. They're orange and they have a little cactus at the end of them. So sweet. Anyhow, I'm just going to use those to push it right into the corners, and that's going to be it for this project. Using these letter stickers from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to spell out the words merry and bright. Then I'm going to take my dry brush with black and go over it fairly heavily so you can see the letters in white. Using the weeding tool from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to pick up the letters and you'll be able to see the words spelled out. Then I'm going to take a red marker and just outline the letters and then go through them with a little red stripe so they look like some candy canes. To add a little bit more to this, I'm going to glue on a couple of pieces of black and white gingham ribbon. I think I got this at Walmart, but it's also available at Michael's. And if you're lucky enough, I think the Dollar Tree carries it sometimes. I'm going to add this second ribbon on the top, so I'm going to have to cut the sides off, and I'm going to use those small little scissors that you see there from the Dollar Tree. They are so sharp and so amazing. I just love them. This next project is just using an old canister lid that I had painted. I'm using the underside of it because it's got a nice little ridge to it. I'm going to give that little ridge there on the outside a couple of coats of white chalk paint. I think I've told you guys this before, but I save everything. These are the tips of some garden stakes that you'll see me use quite often on my channel. I really love to use them because they're a nice soft wood and they cut really easily, but they're about 10 inches long. I'm going to glue 3 of these little pieces together to create a little house. Using the regular size craft sticks or popsicle sticks, whatever you want to call them, I'm going to make a little roof for each of my little houses. I did create 2 of them. And again, I'm going to use my miter shears to cut them. It's super easy to use the miter shears for this type of wood. If you have anything that's a little bit thicker and a little bit harder, sometimes you've got to work at it a little bit with the miter shears. So just be aware of that if you decide to purchase them. I have a link for them down in my description box. I'm just going to hot glue the little sticks on to create the roof, and check out these adorable little baby houses. I'm going to take some white chalk paint and paint the front, the sides, and the back. Then I'm going to work on the roof. I picked up some black gel stain right after the holidays last year from CraftSmart, and it was at Michael's. I got it for $5 and I thought I would give it a try a few times. I have used it, but I like to use it most on raw wood like these popsicle sticks. It just brings out the color so much better than if it was painted a different color. So first I'm going to hot glue the 2 little houses down, kind of stagger them. And then I'm going to take all of these little bottle brush trees that I picked up from the Dollar Tree last year. I have a ton of them in my stash because I am so addicted to bottle brush trees. And then I have a couple of other different ones that are a little bit larger, and those I picked up at Dollarama as well. I don't really have a pattern for how I'm attaching these. I just put the big one right behind the first little house, and then I added some of the little ones kind of around the corners and just to fill in. Now that I have everything where I want it to be, I'm going to just use a small brush and paint the rest of the wood brown. I didn't want to paint first and then glue on because sometimes the glue just doesn't stick properly on top of the paint. Now I'm not sure if it's the talc that I'm using. I do use Johnson & Johnson baby powder talc, which I know is not available anymore, but I've had these for a really long time. So that in my experience, if I paint first and then try to glue, it usually doesn't stick properly. Now I'm going to add some of the Dollar Tree white sand, and I'm not sure that it's sand, it's more like tiny, tiny little pebbles. Anyhow, I'm going to be putting it on with a fairly thick layer of Mod Podge, and then I'm sprinkling it on. I'm going to use the spoon to pat it down and then shake off the excess. And I'll repeat this process for the whole part of the trees and the house, but just on that little ridge at the top, I'm going to leave the outside border plain. I'm taking 4 popsicle sticks and staining them with the black gel stain. I go over it fairly thickly and then just let them dry. I'm also taking 4 small little wooden beads that are kind of a stained color already, but I'm just adding a little bit of the black stain just to deepen them up a little bit so they kind of match the roof of the house and the popsicle sticks. I just want everything to be in the same color family. Using the miter shears one more time, I'm just going to trim off that round edge and then measure how long I need the popsicle stick to be to frame out this little village. I'll trim it down again and then add some hot glue and make a little fence around it. I'm using the little wooden beads as risers for the little village, and I'm just going to take some hot glue and glue one in each corner. This turned out adorable. I hope you like it as much as I do. For this next DIY, I'm starting off by trimming a branch that I picked from my backyard. I've got quite a few bushes out there that need some pruning, but I just decided to grab one of the branches for now and just cut it about 5 inches long. I'm using a spade bit that is wide enough to fit the diameter of the stick because I want to be able to drill a hole into the wooden cabinet knob that I have so I can fit the stick right inside with some hot glue and it will stay nice and secure. Using some hot glue, I'm going to fill up the hole, poke the stick in, and make sure that it's standing nice and straight, so I'll have to hold it up until the glue dries. I've got some evergreen picks that are absolutely gorgeous. I picked these up on Amazon. I've got the link down in my description box. I'm probably going to get some more this year. They come in a pack of 60 and I think they're about $12 to $15. So it's a really good buy. I used a bunch of them last year and I'm still going strong with a few of them this year. I'm just going to trim them down because what I want to do is have some smaller pieces of evergreen to work with. I'm starting by hot gluing some of the longer pieces that I just trimmed down at the bottom of the wood stem. And this is going to start creating the bottom branches of my little Christmas tree. Now, I like to have branches kind of going in a bunch of different directions because no Christmas tree grows absolutely perfect. So what I'm going to do is just put 3 of them down and then I'll start filling it in. So here you can see I started with 3 at the bottom and now I'm adding some in between. And I want to kind of do a brick lay, which means that you want to fill in the gaps. So wherever there isn't one, you're going to glue one. I do end up trimming these a little wee bit down at the bottom here because I did find that they were a little too long. But then I took some smaller pieces and continued to fill in and work my way up to the top of the stick. Here's how the tree looks so far. I think it's pretty cute. The only thing I'm going to do now is look at it from all angles and fill in where I think there are some gaps. So I ended up using probably about a dozen of these little picks, and I just kept cutting them down and sticking them in wherever I needed to fill in some spaces and make it look fairly uniform all the way around. I love how this little tree turned out. I've never really been able to find tiny little trees like this at the stores, so why not just make myself one? I have been loving all of the book stacks and I've made myself a few as well, but I wanted to make something smaller for my tier tray and I don't have any books that small. I decided to take a 2x4 piece, which is a 4x4 piece of wood, and my ruler and just use my screwdriver to create some lines right in the wood. And this actually turned out fairly good. I was pretty impressed at how soft this wood was and that I was able to make some nice score lines. I'm going to go ahead and paint it with some white chalk paint, but in hindsight, I didn't need to do this because the next step is taking a piece of book paper from a different book that I have, and I decided to just glue that on with some Mod Podge so it would really look like some old books were stacked together. I placed the paper where I wanted it on top of the block and then ran my finger around the edges to create a nice crease. Then I just applied a good layer of Mod Podge to the block and glued the paper right on top. I put a layer of Mod Podge on top and then trimmed off the edges. Then I decided to add another piece of paper to the spine of the books, but this is a blank piece of paper from that same book. So I'll use the same method with Mod Podge on the bottom and then some Mod Podge on the top. I printed off this adorable little image from Pixabay on some tissue paper. It's a little bird sitting on a branch with a Santa hat, and I thought it was just the perfect little addition to my book stack. So I'm going to do the same thing. I have Mod Podge on the bottom, and I'm very gently going to use my wet brush with some Mod Podge on it and gently push down the tissue paper right onto the book. Part of this little image had the words Merry Christmas, so I cut them out separately and I'm going to Mod Podge them on the top right corner of the book stack. This image is also free from Pixabay and I'll link it down in the description box. Last year I did grab a pack of the Dollar Tree butcher twine, which is the red and white, and I think they had a green and white and a blue and white all together in one pack. I secured the twine with a drop of hot glue at the bottom and I'm going to wrap it around 3 times in this direction and then I'm going to turn it, hot glue it at the bottom again, and wrap it in the opposite direction. I added a few pieces of the evergreen picks, some little tiny baby hemlock pine cones, and a couple of red pipberries to finish this little book stack off. I love it. I think it's absolutely adorable. I just love tiered tray DIYs. My final project for you today is a little gnome. Although he turns out a little bit bigger than I expected him to be, but he still fits on my tiered tray. I've got a piece of red and black buffalo plaid fabric, and I'm just using some of this filler as the bottom weight for him. I like to use this filler because it turns into a little beanbag gnome, and I just think that's so much fun. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and gather everything together and tie it off with a piece of twine. For his beard, I'm going to be using this fur ribbon that I got from Michael's last year, and I'm going to trim off the wired edges because I don't need that. Now, when you're trimming fur and you're cutting it in lengthwise, what you want to do is make sure that you're using a tiny little pair of scissors like this, and you're only trimming the fabric on the back or the mesh or whatever it is. You want to be able to still have that nice wispy fur hanging down. And if you cut with big scissors all the way through, you're not going to have that wisp. It's going to take the fur with it. So this is how you need to cut fur. It works out every time I do it. Using quite a bit of hot glue, I'm going to glue the beard right onto the body underneath where I tied it with the twine. I'm going to cut out a triangle shape from this chamois that came from the Dollar Tree. It's in the automotive aisle. It's their car wash cloths, I think is what they're called. Anyhow, I'm just going to fold it over and then I've got my exact shape on each side. Then I'm going to take some hot glue and glue it together. I'm gluing the right sides together so the outside portion is actually on the inside and vice versa. Once it's had a chance to cool, I'll turn it right side out.
I stuffed the bottom half of the hat with some extra fabric, and I'm just making a little hole here so I can make sure that it sits right on top of the fabric that is tied up. I'm going to use a good amount of hot glue. That will hold it in place, but I'm also going to be gluing the edges of the hat right onto the red and black buffalo plaid. My gnome needs a nose, so I've got this really big bead that I painted white, just a little bit of a dry brushing. It was a dark brown bead. I didn't want it that color. And now, I'm sorry I'm off screen here, but I'm taking a little bit of my red chalk paint and dry brushing it over just to give him a little bit of a pink look. I glued down his nose, and then he's just about complete. Using these little scissors again, I'm cutting out a tiny little piece of the fur. I want to put this around the end of his hat. You could put whatever you wanted. You could use a bead, you could do a tassel, you could do some fringy yarn, but I really like to have the hat matching the beard. I just think it makes everything look so well put together and more high end. I also used a bead of hot glue just to tack down his hat, and he is good to go. Project number 1 today is some string trees. So I've got some twine on a spool and some aluminum foil and some plastic wrap. Using about a 12-inch piece of foil, I'm going to roll it into a cone shape and then cut off the excess and make the bottom as flat as possible. The cone should stand on its own. Using a long piece of plastic wrap, I'm going to totally cover up the foil. The plastic wrap is going to prevent the glue from sticking to the foil. You could also make a cone out of styrofoam or some cardboard. I just wanted to make sure that whatever I was going to be putting the string around was flexible enough that I'd be able to squish it and pull it out. Starting with a piece of twine, I'm going to just make a knot at the bottom of the tree, and that's going to just help secure it in place so it doesn't loosen up. Now all you have to do is just wrap the twine around the cone shape. You can go in any direction or pattern that you like. It doesn't have to be perfect. I actually like mine kind of messy and not perfect at all. So I'm just going to keep wrapping at the bottom, and then I'm going to turn it around and wrap at the top as well. Once you have enough twine, you can go ahead and tie it off. I'm going to be taking some Mod Podge, and I have it in a small bowl. I've diluted it about 1/3 water to 2/3 Mod Podge. I want this to be the consistency of school glue. Now you can use regular school glue or any other white glue you have. You just need to make sure that it is easily spreadable. You want the twine to be able to absorb all of that glue. So you're going to put it on fairly heavy and make sure that you get every little bit of twine covered in the glue. I wanted this tree to have a little bit more texture and color, so I'm just taking some cotton butcher twine and I'm doing the same thing, wrapping it around, but I'm just not going to be putting as much on it. I still want some of the brown twine to show through. Once I have the look I like, I'm just taking the glue and I'll apply it to the cotton twine. Then I decided to add one more thin layer of the regular twine. I let the trees dry overnight to make sure that the glue was good and hard. Then I took the plastic wrap and the foil and I squished it from the inside at the bottom and very gently pulled it out. I wanted to add a little bit of a snow or icy effect, so I'm taking a can of hairspray and just spraying a strip of the tree and then putting some Epsom salts on top. I'm going to tap it down with the spoon and with my finger, shake off the excess, and then I'll give it another coat of hairspray, which will help the Epsom salts to continue to stick to the tree.
I really love how these trees turned out, and I do have some of that white and black butcher twine. I just might give that a try and make a string tree from that too. The second DIY I have for you today is using some corks. So you'll see that these corks look a little wet, and it's a good idea to take them and put them in hot water for about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, just so they soften up a little bit. Then they're a little easier to cut, and they also won't crumble as easily. Altogether, you'll need 3 corks for this project. I've cut one in half, so 2 of the larger corks will be the body and the 2 smaller ones will be the head. Now I'm cutting some pieces of bamboo skewer, which will become the reindeer's legs. And if you haven't already figured it out, this is the reindeer DIY. Working with corks can be a little tough. They were giving me a hard time, but I did use the pointed end of the skewer and then just kind of twisted and pushed at the same time, and I was able to get them all in. I also ended up making a little pre-drilled hole with a sharp bamboo skewer, and then later on I ended up using a tiny little screwdriver, which made a much bigger hole and it was easier to put in. These skewers will become the legs of the reindeer, and I'm putting them on an angle so I can make sure that the reindeer will stand up properly. To attach his little cork head, I cut a smaller piece of skewer, made a hole at the top of the reindeer's body, pushed the skewer in, and then pushed the cork head onto that skewer. If you're out and about on social media, look me up. I'm on Pinterest and Instagram. So here's my little reindeer. He's standing up on his own fairly well. I'm going to embellish him now, and I'm using these little red pip berries for his antlers. So I've cut off a piece of 2 little pip berries, and I'm just folding up the bottom, which will be the little antler that is closer to their head. I'm still going to have to make a pretty big hole and push that in. It took a little bit of effort, but it was worth it in the long run because these guys turned out so cute. Last spring at our cottage, I actually went foraging, and we have some hemlock trees that give us these tiny, tiny little pine cones. I thought these would be perfect for the deer's tail and for his ears. Since their little antlers are red, I decided to give them a black nose just using this tack. My reindeer was looking pretty cute at this point, but I wanted to give him a little bit extra stability. So I've got these tiny little wood beads that are from the dollar store, and I'm just going to put some hot glue and then push the skewer into the bead, and that will become his little foot. I wanted the reindeer to feel a little cozy, so I decided to give him a little buffalo check ribbon for a scarf. And here's how my little reindeer turned out. So I've got the reindeer, but now I need their feed. I'm taking this fine weave burlap and I'm going to cut about a 6-inch piece off. I'm going to fold it in half and then hot glue the ends together. I've been using those little pink silicone fingertips from the Dollar Tree, but you know what? They just don't fit. They're too small for my fingers. So I decided to just grab one of their little spatulas, and I'm using the handle end to place it onto the hot glue and prevent burns on my finger. It's working out really well. Now I'm just gluing the bottom ends together, and I made sure that the original seam was also at the back. Burlap is really hard to write on, so I decided to grab this little piece of drop cloth and I just cut it into a rectangle shape, and I'm going to take a fine tip black marker and write in Reindeer Feed. Then I'll simply hot glue the little label right on top of the burlap sack. To fill up the bag, I'm just using a little mix of green and yellow peas. This is just something that I had for a fall craft, so I thought I would just use it up. And then I'm just going to hot glue the bag together. I'm also just going to take a little bit more of that buffalo check ribbon and glue it onto the top, crossing it over in the front, and then adding a little bit of holly and some leaves. The final project I have for you is super simple. I have this little white container that I had from a thrift store. I've taken an egg carton just to give it a little bit of filler, and now I'm just going to take a little screwdriver and poke a couple of holes so I can attach these bottle brush trees. I'm going to just use a little bit of hot glue to hold them in place. I'm now going to add another smaller tree right next to the big one, but a little bit in front. While I was putting it in, I just wiggled the branches just a little bit so it would kind of wedge itself into the original tree. But I did end up having to add a little bit of hot glue to hold them together. Taking some of the Epsom salts, I'm just going to fill up the whole little container, and that'll just give the trees and that little egg carton a little bit more stability. It'll also look very much like icy snow. I really liked how this was looking, but I thought I would like to maybe add some of these little tiny trees as well. I'm just taking the bottoms off simply by sort of unscrewing it a little bit, and I'm not going to glue these little trees in place. They just sit there really nicely. I'm just going to poke them in wherever I feel like. I finally found this black and white cotton twine. I did have to get it at Michael's because our dollar stores up here just don't seem to have any. I'm going to take a length of it and wrap it around a few times on the base of the little container and then just tie a knot. And here's how he turned out. I think it's just adorable. Project number 2 is this adorable little barn birdhouse. I'm going to remove the dowel and the string because I won't need those. Using a piece of the aluminum from a Dollar Tree cookie sheet, I'm going to put the roof on because I want this barn to have more of a metal roof look to it. So on each of the angles, I'm going to just measure out what I need with a little bit to hang over. Using hot glue, I'm going to glue the first piece on. Remember, when you're using hot glue and these Dollar Tree aluminum sheets, it gets pretty warm, so you've got to be very careful. I'm centering it here now, and then I'm going to fold down those little edges so it covers up the wood frame. I'm going to cut out a square in each of the corners so I don't have any overlap. Here's the roof all done. The only other thing that I'm going to do is put a small strip right across the center and just cover up any of the little wood pieces that are still showing through. To fill in the hole where the dowel was, I just trimmed the dowel in half, and I'm just going to add some hot glue and push it all the way through. This next part is fairly simple. I'm just going to start painting the little barn. Underneath the roof, I'm going to paint it black. I'll also paint the base of it black. Then I'm going to take some of my red chalk paint, add a tiny little bit of black because I'm not a really bright red person, make it more of a deeper red, and the barn will get just one coat. I'm going to use white and a tiny little detail brush to paint the barn doors. To cover up the hole where the birds would go in, I painted a little piece of cardboard, and now I'm just going to cut out a circle. I'm taking this little piece of garland. It was just one of the branches that I snipped off. I'm going to trim it down with my scissors and give it a bit of a haircut. I don't want the fringes to be very long because I'm going to turn this into a tiny little wreath. I'm going to bend the wire into a cute little circle, trim off some of the edges, and then hot glue it right onto the cardboard. To add a little bit more holiday flair, I'm going to glue on these little foam beads that are covered with red glitter. Now I'm going to take some little mini trees from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to trim off that little gold base and hot glue one of them on each side of the barn doors. Here's a look at how these two projects turned out. My first project for you today is using this little gift bag. It came in a set of 2 at Michael's. The other one is just a solid buffalo check. I'm going to fill this with just some filler stuff that I have hanging around the house, and I'm going to just make sure that it can stand up properly. Now I'm just taking these wood cubes. These were just some scrap wood that I had hanging around. Whenever I do some cutting of wood for other projects, I take the extras and make cubes or diamond shapes, whatever I think I might need for the future, but cubes are always handy to have. I'm going to give them one coat of DecoArt chalky finish in the color Romance. I'm going to glue some buffalo check ribbon on them so they look like presents. I'm going to make a sweet little bow very simply just by creating 2 loops that are folded over and glued together, and then I'll glue that to the top of the gift. For a final touch, I'm going to add a little mini jingle bell. I'm using this piece of dowel to glue onto the bottom of the gift because I want the dowel to be able to be pushed down inside of the bag. I'm going to use some hot glue to put it together. With the mouth of the bag open just a little bit, I'm going to just push the gifts right into the bag. I think this is the sweetest little Santa gift bag I've ever seen. DIY number 2 is creating a little box for this tiny little tree that I got for $3 last year after Christmas at HomeSense. I braved the stores last year and went and did some Boxing Day sales, and I couldn't be happier with some of the things that I found. I'm going to create a little wooden crate that has a little X on it, so it looks like a little farmhouse crate. I'm starting out by cutting some of these garden stakes that I have with my miter shears. Next, I'm going to measure out the popsicle sticks, so that's going to be making the frame on the end, and it will also help to glue those 2 original pieces together. For this box, I'm going to be putting 2 of the popsicle sticks on the outer edge, about halfway off, and you can see that here. That's going to give me a really nice clean edge when I glue the 4 sides together. Using the same size popsicle stick, I'm measuring out the first line of the X that I want to do on these boxes, and then I'll do the 2 smaller pieces for the other side. You could certainly use one of those little wood boxes from the Dollar Tree to save yourself a little bit of time, but I didn't have any of those, so I just decided to wing it and do it this way. Here are my 4 pieces. The ones with the X on them have the little popsicle stick that has the overlap, as you can see here. And I'm going to put the glue there and then add one of the plain sides and glue it together. As I said before, this is going to give me a really nice clean seam. Look at how nice that's going to look. It's really going to be a high-end looking little box. Now I do need a bottom for my box because I will be putting that little tree in it. So I'm taking some of these garden stake pieces and I'm measuring the inside length of the box. I don't want these pieces to sit on the top of the bottom. As you can see here, I want them to fit right inside. And again, this is just going to help it look like a more professional looking little box. I'm going to remove the burlap, which will reveal a little concrete round, and that will make it really easy for me to hot glue that little piece of concrete right to the bottom of the box, and I'm going to just fill it with some reindeer moss to finish it off. I'm going to leave the box in its natural wood state just for something a little different and to make it look a little bit more rustic. I think it turned out super sweet. Project number 3 is using this sweet little buffalo check tin that I grabbed at the Dollar Tree and a leftover contact paper Gingerbread Man stencil. Using some white chalk paint and a makeup sponge, I'm just going to sponge on the white paint, being super careful around the edges because again, this is just Dollar Tree contact paper. It doesn't have a huge amount of stick, but it's going to do the job for me today. You'll want to be really careful pulling off this contact paper, but you want to do it when the paint is still wet because otherwise it will probably peel up some of the paint with it. But it turned out really cute. The second project I have for you today is using these letters that are going to spell out Holly Jolly. I started by doing a bit of a stain on them with black and brown acrylic paint. Didn't like that effect, so I took my white Craft Smart paint pen, painted them white. Still didn't like it, so I ended up painting them red. And I'm glad I went with the red. It showed up nice and deep because of the stain underneath it. Now I'm going to take one of these tote bags from the Dollar Tree. This buffalo check pattern is awesome to use in crafts and it's so much easier than having to paint the buffalo check. It's a little on the shiny side, but if you put some Mod Podge on top and you're using the matte Mod Podge, it will dull the shine a little bit. I've cut a square of the buffalo check bag out and my idea is to put it on top of this previously stained little palette. Now, what I want to be able to do is cut it out and make sure that I've got a little bit of that wood frame showing all the way around. What I want to do is have those little slats be visible, so I'm taking my craft knife and I'm just running it along the edge of the bottom slat and therefore cutting the bag, and then I'll be able to glue that on. Now you may be wondering why I'm not just gluing the piece of bag on top of the palette and then cutting out the slats. Well, I don't want to lose my pattern, and if I do that, then I'm going to have a smaller pattern. Some squares will be small, some squares will be big, and I don't want to do that. Now, the other thing I did was I just marked where I needed to cut, and I used my scissors because it just ended up being a cleaner cut and much easier. And voila, it's all finished. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I lost a whole bunch of footage, so I'm just going to talk you through what I did for this little DIY. Once I had the buffalo check bag all glued on, I took my letters, and you can see here that I used some large letters and some smaller letters, and I wanted this to be just a fun little sign. So I put the holly and the jolly a little wonky, and then I just literally added some holly and some red berries in the center, and this sign is finished.
this next project is my absolute favorite. It is just adorable. I'm using some regular size popsicle sticks, and I've got two sets of four here, and they're about 3.5 inches in length. Then I'm cutting some more pieces that are about 1.5 inches in length. And I'm using these miter shears. I love them. I just got them not too long ago. I will have a link down in my description box for them if you want to go check them out. They are super handy for making different angled cuts, but even just working with popsicle sticks, I can't use scissors. It's just too difficult for me. So I am just using these miter shears to make the job easier. Now that I've got these 1.5 inch pieces cut, I'm going to use those as the pieces to glue the four longer pieces together. And that's going to make the sides of this little box that I'm creating. So now I've created two of the long sides of my box, and now I have to create the short sides. So these are 1.5 inch pieces, maybe almost 2 inches, maybe 1 3/4 inches. Anyway, you can make this any size you want. It really doesn't matter, but this is the pattern that I'm using. So I'm going to now glue these together with these little side pieces. But what I'm doing now is I'm going to hang that side piece off the four because I want there to be a little bit of an overhang. And the reason I'm doing that is when I glue everything together, I want to have a nice seam in the corners. Now that the sides are all assembled, I need to give it a bottom. So I just cut some more popsicle sticks in the length that I needed, and I'm just gluing them to either edge. Now it's time to paint, or I should say stain. I'm using some burnt umber and a little bit of black. I'm going to mix that together, and then I will use a spray bottle to add some water and just make it a nice deep brown stain. I'm going to cover all of the box, the bottom, the sides, and the inside. While I wait for the box to dry, I'm going to take some of these little sticks that I got from my backyard, and I'm going to dry brush some of them with white. I want them to look a little bit like birch logs. They're not going to be 100%, but some of that little bit of bark is going to show through. I just wanted to have a couple different colors of wood. I'm going to take this white marker that I have. It's not a paint pen, it's just a marker, and it's going to be very faint, and that's what I want. I wanted this box to kind of look old. So what I'm doing is just writing in the words birch and pine, and I'm going to put a little dollar amount next to them. So the birch will be 10 cents and the pine will be 5 cents. I'm going to add in some of these greenery picks, and then I'll glue in the logs too. And at the end, I'm just going to add a few little red pip berries. The last project I have for you today is using these wood planks from the Dollar Tree and these beautiful napkins. These I did get at Dollarama. They're gorgeous. Look at the back side of them. That reindeer is beautiful and the snowflakes are so pretty. So what I'm going to do is cut out the reindeer and use my Mod Podge, glue that to the front. I'm going to take one of the pieces from the back and glue that on the back so I have a double-sided sign. I'm going to use Mod Podge to glue the napkin on, and because this is raw wood, you have to put a fairly decent amount because it's going to soak in pretty quickly. The other thing that I'm going to do is mist down the napkin with a little bit of water because that's going to give me some extra working time. Then I'll just lay the napkin right onto the wood plank and smooth it out as best I can.
I don't mind having wrinkles and bubbles in my signs. I think that makes them look a little bit more aged and weathered and vintage. But if you want something really smooth, then you're going to have to be super, super careful with these napkins because they do tear fairly easily. Then I'm going to put a coat of Mod Podge on top, and then once it's dry, I'll remove the excess napkin. I'm using 3 of these tumbling tower blocks, and that's going to become the stand for my sign. I'm going to glue them together end to end with hot glue. The sign is fairly dry now, so what I'm going to do is take some sandpaper and just go along the edge to remove any of the excess napkin. This is a really easy way to get a nice clean edge. Now I'll repeat the same process with the napkin on the back of the sign. I'm going to put some glue down the center of the tumbling tower blocks and then glue the wood piece right on top. To finish the edging off and make it look a little bit more clean and high end, I'm using this buffalo check ribbon that I grabbed at Michael's. I think it's about a 1/2 inch wide, and I'm going to glue it down the center of the frame. So I'm going to have a little bit of ribbon poking out on each side. If you've been following me along on YouTube and watching my videos, you'll know that I'm not a bow person. But this sign needed a little something to finish it off. So I'm just going to make 2 little loops with some hot glue. And I'm going to glue them together. And then I'm going to make a tiny little loop and glue that in the center, and it will become my bow.
For my first project, I'm going to be taking one of these artist panels that you can get at the Dollar Tree. You can also find these at Michael's in varying sizes, and I'm pretty sure that Walmart has some of them too. I'm using a walnut gel stain that I have diluted a little bit with some water. I'm going to go around the frame, on the inside of the frame, the outside of the frame, and the back. I'm just going to be putting the stain on, and then once I have it all applied, I'll just use a paper towel to wipe off the excess. I'm using some white acrylic paint and a small brush, and I'm going to just very carefully go around the edges of the frame and fill it in with the white paint. I will give this a couple of coats so it's nice and crisp. I'm using my Dollar Tree weeding tool to take off the excess vinyl. With these larger pieces, I didn't have any issues with the vinyl not being cut all the way through. I was able to pull that excess vinyl off very easily. So I have a larger green candy cane pear, and now this will be a white candy cane pear. I'm just using some Dollar Tree clear contact paper, and that will do just fine for this small project. I am going to take my weeding tool and just pull off that little piece of clear contact paper, and I'm going to just kind of get some of the sticky off by just putting it on my mat a few times. When you're layering with vinyl, it's really not that difficult and it has a really beautiful look. I'm starting off with my green candy cane at the bottom, and now I've pulled off the white candy cane using the clear contact paper from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to be placing that right on top. And then I'm going to pull the contact paper off again. Now it's time to weed out the little candy cane pieces, and I did have a little bit of trouble with this. Some of the cuts didn't go all the way through, so I needed to use my weeding tool and just push them down so they would stay on the white backing instead of coming up with the rest of the excess vinyl. I'll do the same thing now by adding the clear adhesive sheet onto the red, pulling that off and placing it right on top of the white. I've got my letters weeded out as well. I didn't want you to have to sit through all of that. And it's all on my clear adhesive sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and get it nicely centered and then just stick it right onto my little plaque here. I think it looks absolutely adorable. I really like this design. And of course, as usual, I will have this available for you as a free printable on my website. The link to that will be down in my description box. I'm going to use my pencil to draw 3 lines on the sign. I'm not going to go over the vinyl. I'm going to stop and then pick my pencil up and then just put it on the backing. And this will create a cute little shiplap design. I'm going to add some little bits of greenery on either side of the candy canes and a couple of little pip berries. And then I'm also going to add the same greenery up at the top of the sign and then finish it off with a cute little jingle bell. I realized today that I haven't done anything with jingle bells this year for Christmas. So I'm thinking of a couple of things that we might have some fun with in my next video. In my first video using the xTool M1 machine, I showed you how you can cut out different shapes like these cute little mini cutting boards and also how you can engrave. So what I did was I took one of these little cutting boards and I put it back into the machine and did a gingerbread recipe engraving on the front of it. I think it's absolutely adorable, and now I'm just going to decorate it. What I'm doing now is just taking some tiny little sprigs of frosted greenery. I think I picked up these little sprigs at Michael's. And then I'm going to add this little two-fingered red and white gingham bow. And I'm also going to add a little jingle bell. And in order for this to stand up, originally I thought I would take all 4 of those cut out gingerbread boards and glue them together so they would stand and be nice and thick, sort of like that little reindeer snow globe that I made in my previous video. But I decided not to do that because then I could make 3 or 4 little boards and use them for different styles of my tiered tray. So what I'm going to do instead is take a tumbling tower block from the Dollar Tree, glue that onto the back of this little board just a little higher than the bottom of the board, and it will just have a slight lean to the back. And it turned out super cute. You'll have to let me know what you think of this one. For this project, I'm going to be using all 4 of these wood truck cutouts. The 2 on the top have some laser engraving, but the 2 on the bottom are plain. I decided to glue these all together because I wanted this truck to be able to stand on its own. I am just using some wood glue because that is the best bond that these will get, and I wanted to make sure that it doesn't fall apart and that it doesn't have any gaps in between. I'm going to just press all the pieces together and wipe off any of the excess glue that pops out in between. And then I'm going to repeat the process, but I'm going to make sure that I don't glue the wrong pieces together. So the 2 trucks that have the engraving also have holes where the tires would be, or the inside of the tires would be. I guess those would be the hubcaps. I want to make sure that I use those on the outside and the 2 solid ones on the inside. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually add a couple of little clamps all around just to make sure that everything stays in place while the glue dries. Here I got a little bit of extra glue on the tires, so I'm just wiping that off. For painting, I'm going to use white for the hubcaps, black, of course, for the tires, and the truck is going to be red. I needed to have at least one little red truck for Christmas this year. The last thing I'm going to do is add 3 different size bottle brush trees onto the back of the pickup truck, and this project is complete. This project was also super easy to do using the xTool machine. I used a piece of walnut and cut out quite a few of these little gingerbread men, and I'm going to be using the vinyl, again, using the xTool blade cutting feature and their vinyl. And I've got the white decor on it, the little squiggles and the smiley face, but I'm using red for his little buttons. Now I'm just putting the red onto the vinyl for the white ones, and then I'll add an extra piece of vinyl and transfer everything all at once. I have a limited supply of these walnut gingerbread men. I believe I have 5 left, and you can order them with or without the decals. For my final project, I will be using some of this Christmas scrapbook paper. I got this in a huge paper pack from Michael's last year. I only just found it a few days ago and I thought, oh my gosh, I've missed out on using so much of this pretty paper. What I'm going to do is cover these candy cane shapes that again were cut out with the X tool. These will also be available on my Etsy shop. And again, you can get them with or without the scrapbook paper. For the sake of the length of this video, I am only going to cover one side of the candy canes, but it would look much better if you had both sides covered. I'm just going to be using a glue stick, glue them on, and then cut out the piece of paper and use my X-Acto knife to cut around the edges of each of the candy canes. I'm going to do 3 in the green plaid and 3 in the red stripe. I searched through my stash and I found one of these little wedding favor buckets from the Dollar Tree. You could use a little cup, you could use a little bowl, whatever suits your plan for a project like this. What I'm going to do next is just take some of the red and white twine that I have and glue 3 layers around the top edge of the bucket. This is just to make it a little bit more festive. Since galvanized metal really cools down hot glue quickly, I have it on a low setting and I'm just going to put little bits of glue on there and then hold it in place. Once I get around the first time, I'll be able to use this first layer of twine to continue gluing the rest of the twine layers on. In order to get the little candy canes to stand upright in the bucket, I'm adding little pieces of bamboo skewer that I just cut on an angle using my little snips there from the Dollar Tree, and then I'll be able to just poke them right into the styrofoam. You can arrange them any way you want to. I started off with the 2 larger ones and they're just facing the opposite direction. And then I just kind of threw the little ones in, making sure that they were kind of spaced evenly apart. And I think this little bucket turned out sweet, but I'm not done yet. I grabbed one of these little frosty sprigs and I'm going to be trimming it down into tiny little pieces. And then I'm going to be gluing them on the red and white twine and I'm going to go all the way around the bucket. I'm going to start in the center at the front, work my way around to the back, and then start at the center in the front, put the branches in the opposite direction and go all the way to the back. Now I'll just add a tiny little pine cone right into the center front and make a shoestring bow out of that red and white twine, and I'm going to glue that right on top of the pine cone. I wanted to add some of those little styrofoam mini snowballs that you can get from the Dollar Tree, but I needed to weigh it down a little bit first. So I thought I would just grab some of these Epsom salts and put those in first, and then I'll just take these tiny little snowballs and sprinkle them along the top to fill up the little bucket. I think this turned out super cute, and you'll have to let me know what you think of this one.
I hope you enjoyed my little Christmas minis. I love making small decor that you can add to shelves, to trays, and anywhere around your home to make it festive. Thanks so much for spending some of your time with me today. Merry Christmas!